Good morning and welcome back to another We Are Sunderland morning briefing in partnership with the Fire Museum and Cospex Opticians. It is Friday, the 1st of March. We're in March already. Where's that time gone?
Yeah, where has that time gone? It's usually the slowest time of the year, isn't it? January and February. That's including a transfer window, but yeah, it's rapid, isn't it?
Yeah, it's been I think it was pretty indicative. It's been a slow January, and then February's flown by now. Now the football's back. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm not bad. Just preparing for the long old jaunt down to Norwich this afternoon. So yeah, good. Yourself?
Yeah, been better. Got this flu. No, not ideal. Not ideal. The missus keeps saying it's man flu, but hey ho, what can you do? Yeah, long old trip down to Norwich. You were at Mike Dodds' press conference yesterday. I was fortunate enough to have a day off. Looked, obviously watched it back. How was it overall? I noticed that he picked up upon and sort of doubled down on the comment that you asked him at the end of the last game about Jack Clarke. Obviously, that's the major talking point from this week, isn't it? Life after Jack Clarke.
Yeah, I mean, I think he was pretty relaxed overall. Similar to what he was last week. I mean, you've got to understand that he's still very early into this as well. I think this is only he's only had 6 games as a head coach, hasn't he?
Yeah.
Over the course of 2 years. But you're right, Jack Clarke was obviously the main talking point from it, the first talking point from it. Just with regards to injury, because I think there was a little bit of confusion last week in terms of, I think it felt as though Clarke could possibly be in and around contention this week. I think Dodds had claimed that any of the sort of internet rumours were not necessarily true. They were wide of the mark. But fast forward a couple of days and then all of a sudden they were. And, it was revealed, the club put out the statement, didn't they, earlier in this week, that Clarke will be out for up to 6 weeks. Dodds kind of just touched on that by saying, it hadn't progressed and healed the way that the club had hoped that it would have done. So then we got to Wednesday and they made the decision to send him to see a specialist, and obviously the fears were revealed. Ankle ligament damage for up to 6 weeks, and that, I mean, he described it as a crushing blow, and that's probably an understatement as well, isn't it? Clarke, we've spoken so many times on this show about how important, how vital he is, his numbers, but I think what we saw last week against Swansea was his position, sort of awareness and sense as well. The tactical shape didn't help, but you realise that him not being there, it changed probably Swansea's game plan in terms of just having players out there and having to deal with them. His presence occupies space and occupies defenders probably more than one in usual circumstances. So, yeah, huge blow. And to think that he's going to be out for 6 weeks, that's sort of, if all goes to plan, you're still talking mid-April by the time he comes back. The season very well could be over by then. Obviously, we all hope that it's not, and that Sunderland can turn a corner and pick the form up and still be in that playoff race. But the likelihood is the season could be over, and then by the time you just come back, there's only a couple of games left. You're then wondering what sort of position does that put them in. The club are sitting on a £20 million asset there. How would they then play those sort of final 3 games of the season? So it's a difficult one, and there's a lot to ponder with that. That's obviously a little bit further down the line, but yeah, the overriding emotion is just one of real sort of disappointment that the Sunderland are going to be without their key man for this period of games, and what is a real tough period of games starting tomorrow.
What have you made of Mike Dodds overall? Because I've been a bit surprised, like pleasantly surprised at how he's approached this. He seems so much more relaxed than maybe he did in his first spell. I think the sounds he's making are quite good as well. But obviously, like anything in football, you'll be judged on your results. What have you made of Mike Dodds himself?
Yeah, I mean, he comes across well in the press conferences. He speaks quite well. I know it probably is a little bit sort of unusual for him. Might be a little bit daunting in some aspects, facing the cameras as often as he is at the moment. But these are things that he knows that he's going to have to overcome and get used to if he wants to be that head coach that he suggested that he wants to be as well. It's very early to tell in terms of how far down the line that is. I think we said it a little bit with Michael Beale, didn't we, in terms of the head coach, the first team coach and the head coach, sort of the differentials in that. I think there's no question that Mike Dodds is a good coach out on the grass with the players, and he has a lot of respect within sort of the first team and the sort of squad at the academy as well. He's held in a good self-esteem there. That step, as we said, with Beale up to head coach, it's difficult because then you've got to take on so many more aspects. Even I think the question was asked him, even things like travel. You've got to you've got a fact that all of a sudden becomes part of your job, and that just sounds totally off the cuff and nothing too strenuous or serious. But I think there's rail strikes today. Then all of a sudden that's just something that has to be thrown up, and you have to deal with it. Your sort of day doesn't necessarily finish with what happens on the grass, and then in the analysis room, there's so many different spinning plates to that. So he's getting to grips with it, and it is a good chance for him these 13 games to see where he is. I think Sunderland, whatever happens, will stick with that. Even if there is a poor run of results, you look at these fixtures off the back of the Swansea game. It's not beyond the realms of possibility that they could go sort of four defeats in a row, and that I know that is perhaps being a little over dramatic there, but I don't think anything would change with that. That it doesn't seem as though there's much point at this stage, especially if we got to that point where the season you would write it off. Then the focus has to be for the club behind the scenes in terms of looking for their longer term appointment and who that's going to be. Hopefully earlier in the summer, but no, I think he conducts himself pretty well. Like you said, though, the proof will be always in the pudding in terms of how he's viewed overall by fans in terms of what the results are on the pitch.
I think as well at this moment in time, it's after the Clarke news as well. I know you've touched on there, obviously, the search for a head coach. This period feels massive, doesn't it? Because this is going to be a sign for life without Jack Clarke, and you're going to have players who either A, are they ready, and B, if not, you need to go out and have a contingency plan and look for the players that you want to strengthen. Now, you've done a great piece over on We Are Sunderland, and again, you can subscribe for just £1 for 6 months worth of coverage, where you've looked at the young pretenders who could step up in the mould. What was there any sort of indication yesterday as to who that could be? Because obviously we saw them with a back three, back five variation against Swansea. I know that you've seen that Abdullah Bar is probably the furthest along. Callum Styles has also played left wing. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, both are options. One thing I will say, just started, Dodds didn't sort of shy away from saying that he will play a back three again if he feels it's necessary. Yeah. He wasn't deterred by what happened last week about playing it again. As bad as the first half was against Swansea, that'll not change his mindset about going with that system again if he feels it's right, which I agree with as well. I think there'll be a lot of sort of shocked faces to hear that, but you've got to back yourself at times. Yeah, it went totally wrong last week, but that doesn't mean to say that it will go as wrong or couldn't work like what we saw against Leeds. That's the barometer, isn't it? That Leeds game that I think we'll all go back to and fans will all go back to. So it can work. I've seen both sides of the coin to it. In terms of the debate for Clarke, there was, like you said, Barr was mentioned, young Tom Watson was mentioned, although I think he's dealt with it with injury at the moment. Romain Mundle was the one who was particularly highlighted, and Dodds seemed quite high on him. I think he came out and said he could be a real asset for Sunderland in the future, and one the fans can get excited about. And that sort of ties in with everything that we've said really since his arrival. There was a piece went up on We Are Sunderland about him, really in depth about his time at Tottenham and Standard Liège, and just the way he operates on the wing as that inverted winger. He can play across the three as well. We haven't seen him over on the left really yet for Sunderland, but it felt as though he is very much in Mike Dodds' thoughts this weekend, and he seemed excited by him. We saw Barr out there in spells against Swansea, that drifted between being out there wide and then narrow as a two, didn't we, with Roos? And I think you'd like to see Barr, in that sense, given an opportunity outright on the left if he was going to be considered as an option there rather than fluctuating. And I think that's been a problem with Barr, to be honest. He's been rotated A, in and out of the squad a lot, and B, when he's in the squad, being rotated around positions quite a lot. I think there's a general consensus that over on the right would probably be Barr's best position, what we've seen. But, if Sunderland are going to play with these inverted wingers, you have to think when Patrick Roberts is back to full fitness, he's probably the number one still over on that right-hand side. So in Clarke's absence, and then further down the line, if he does leave, that left spot becomes really open, and, there's a lot of competition there. So these 6, 7, 8 games that Clarke is sort of penciled to be out for, they're really crucial. And look, I'm not necessarily on the bandwagon of saying, oh yeah, it's great that Clarke's out so we can see this, because obviously you would rather not having Jack Clarke in the side is a massive blow. But it has to be a chance for these players who Sunderland are earmarking and bringing in to go on a similar path and a similar trajectory as what Clarke's done over certainly the last 12 months, and really stamp their authority and put a claim in and say, yeah, that this is going to be my shirt sort of in this period and next season, put themselves in Mike Dodds' thoughts and then in a potential new head coach's thoughts in the summer. It has to be. And they've got to be given opportunities to do that. And Mundell is one that I think that there is a lot of excitement about. Again, expectations are going to have to be tempered. Dodds said pretty much exactly what he said to me last weekend in terms of you can't replace Jack Clarke. He is irreplaceable. He will be for pretty much every team in this division. So not to expect any of these players to come in and produce what he's doing in terms of his numbers and his outputs. But there is potential there, and we've seen it with Jack Clarke, that if he buys into what the club are doing, the methods and all the training and the advice behind the scenes, that there is good players with potential who can go on and excel at this level.
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, on the point you made about Abdullah Bar, we saw at Ipswich first half. He was fantastic, wasn't he? And then all of a sudden, he's out of the side after that. That has been, I dare use the word consistency again. Yeah. It's something that Sunderland as a whole have struggled with this season. But again, I think Abdullah Bar in particular is a player that struggles with consistency because he'll play really well. And then, but is that down to, as you say, to shifting around positions? There's plenty of sort of questions that come from Abdullah Bar's sort of involvement. But again, you need that sort of run in the side. It's the questions we've had about up front. They sort of still remain. Just to go back to the Swansea game, it was a strange setup, and I know that they shifted to a more orthodox, so to speak, like a 4-3-3 or 4-2-3-1. But first half, Rusyn and Barr were like a two, weren't they? And then they split to allow Job to run through the middle. But that shouldn't, in my opinion anyway, that shouldn't diminish what Nazari Rusyn has brought to the side so far. I've seen comments online about time to give somebody else a go. While I understand that, I actually think that he still is your out and out number one striker at the minute, just because of a couple of a bad game in particular against Swansea. I don't think that that's a great deal to suggest changing things too drastically.
No, I agree, and I do. I'd be surprised if it's not sort of a revert to type this weekend in terms of back four, and then your two lines of three across midfield and up front. And I agree with you. I think Rusyn will be the one to go back through the middle, and like we've just touched on there about Romain Mundell, him possibly starting on the left and then seeing Barr on the right. I think that could be how Sunderland go this weekend. Again, it's going to be on numbers and goals. That is what people are invested in terms of your striker. He is, as low as the numbers have been, he is the one that's leading. But it's the runs off the ball. There is a little bit more of a development there, whether that's with the age or his experience. In the league in Ukraine, his off the ball movement is slightly better than the others at the moment. I know there's been a little bit of sort of suggestions and calls for Hamia to be given a look in as well. I think he was someone as well that Mike Dodds touched on yesterday, and it's kind of striking that balance. He said that his fitness is improving. That's one thing that people have noticed, and why he output when he's come on late in games where people have sort of taken that sort of opinion and suggested that he's looked okay when he's come on. Fitness is a lot of that, but it's getting to grips with, and this was a question that I asked him, it's getting to grips with the culture here in terms of how a championship forward is expected to play compared to how a forward in Benfica and in the reserve teams of Benfica is expected to play, because the two are miles apart. The output in terms of just chasing down defenders, your off the ball work is so different in this league. In all of these leagues, you go down to as far as League Two, and even sides in the National League, you have strikers who will absolutely graft off the ball and chase defenders down. They are the first line of defence, because teams set up, as we saw Sunderland last Saturday, playing that risk and reward football in terms of gambling players forward, gambling your wing backs forward, and almost making it like a front six or a front eight out of possession to try and win the ball back as quickly as possible. The striker's integral in that, and Rusyn probably offers you more in that. Well, he certainly does offer you more than that compared to the others at the moment. He's the one who's chasing the lines down, and I agree. I think him being given another shot through the middle, it would make sense to me, and operating with your two wide players in Barr and Mundell this weekend. Just quickly going back to Barr as well, the one thing I would say, I think looking at his numbers, he's third in terms of goals and assists behind Dan Neil and obviously Jack Clarke, but that is playing sort of about half the game time of Jack Clarke as well. So and almost done nails. So if you were to give him a bit more game time and double that, if he was to continue on a similar trajectory, you would suggest that his numbers he would probably be second outright in a lot of the metrics, a lot of the positive metrics that we see from Clarke. Bar would be there. So there is signs that since he came in 18 months ago that he is progressing. I think there's frustration there because again it balances in that here and now, one success now compared to waiting down the line. And he is only 20. You know, when Clarke was 20, he'd still had a couple of seasons in the Championship. When he's turned 23, you know, he's had a lot of seasons in the a lot of experience, over 100 games in the Championship. And I mean, yeah, he's taking his game to a whole new level, but there are levels to that in terms of your age and just experience in the league. But he is on a positive trajectory with his numbers. So that is encouragement, but consistency, as you said, is the key word.
Yeah, interestingly, you spoke about the metrics there. We'll quickly touch on some of those before we get into Norwich. So this, if we take a closer look, as in we are Sunderland's, obviously, we've got a partnership up with StatsBomb, which is exclusive to us. So obviously, I'll just run you through a little bit of what we see here. So obviously, for those of you who don't know what expected goals is, it's the metric designed to measure the probability of a shot which results in a goal. So, for example, an XG model uses historical information from thousands of shots with similar characteristics to estimate the likelihood of a goal between 0 and 1. So, as we see in front of us, obviously, the first sort of chunk is Sunderland's XG under Tony Mowbray and expected goals against. Rises quite high. Mike Dodds' little medium tenure there. What you see is obviously the highest XG Sunderland have had this season under a manager and the lowest expected goals against, interestingly. Then we see Michael Beale's appointment, and we see that expected goals just fall off a cliff. And that's, I've done a bit of throughout the week on this, and you can read that for a bit more in depth. But that graphic alone is pretty damning of where Sunderland are at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that the thing is as well, if you're setting up where you're negating your XG, like what we saw from Beale, we saw the banks of 4 coming in from the attack, didn't we? And it was very narrow. Gave up the wings quite a lot just to make it compact. The XG against hasn't risen. Yeah. You know, to flip that, it hasn't risen enough to flip that and justify that, which is obviously a big concern. The Dodds 3 games is interesting. Obviously, the Leeds one being the lowest XG against. And then you see what happened on Saturday. It's a funny old game, isn't it? But you're right. That XG4 is a big concern at how much that's dropped off, and it shows as well. You know, I mean, I know there was a lot of people who will suggest that Mowbray's time it might have come to an end. You know, he was struggling. You know, I think it was 2 and 9 wins towards the end of his tenure, but I think there can be a case he was getting the absolute most out of this group of players. You know, their attacking output and their strengths, which it is. We saw that last year, the sort of fluidity and the way that they just go gung-ho and hell for leather almost with teams. That was the strength. Yeah, it worked against them in some games where they'd be found, where they get caught out. You know, I think you go back to the Stoke game, for example, when Alex Neil came back up to 5-1. That they were susceptible to that, but it was exciting, it was entertaining, and you know, I know that dropped off a little bit as well. The start of this season, you know, we could go right off on a tangent here and go down in terms of talking about the squad and whether it's progressed, regressed. But yeah, overall, that XG, it really is worrying. That is something that Dodds will have to try and find a solution to. But without Clarke as well, you know, he's been responsible for 19 goals this season that Sunderland have scored. That is an enormous task, and it's a tough place to put him in as well. You know, he said this yesterday, a week into the role, and he's been dealt a hand where he's going to be without the key player for 6 or 7 weeks, and obviously off the back of that defeat as well. Yeah, really tough.
Yeah, I'll just take that off the screen now. So obviously heading into Norwich City at the weekend there, I spoke with Connor from the Pink, and obviously you can go out and listen back to that one. They're in a pretty decent run of form at the minute, and they find themselves just outside the playoffs. I think it's 5 unbeaten. Sunderland's away form this season. It's been well documented. It's not great. However, I think is it unbeaten in the last 3, I think, trips to Carrow Road. There's plenty of sort of up for grabs this weekend.
There's a lot of similarities about when Sunderland went to Carrow Road almost at the same time last year. I think it was early March when they went down there. They'd lost 3 games off in a row. I think they were 6 points off the playoffs in 10th, 8 now in 10th. Norwich had found some form and they'd got themselves up there. And if it on paper it looked as though one kind of what you're going into this weekend thinking, well, it's a really tough fixture and someone might lose this one, and then they went and picked out a result. It was actually they were only winning 9 games. They went on a real tough run at this time last year. So there's a lot of similarities, but I don't know about it. It feels a little bit different this time, and obviously without Clarke, it feels as though it's going to be a tougher period for Sunderland. Quite obviously, Carrow Road has been a difficult place for Sunderland, but you're right in saying that, the last 3 times that they've been there, that they've won. So, do these things factor in? Possibly, but there's no doubt about it. It's a tough game, and that XG thing will be something that Norwich will look at as well, and from set pieces and things like that. I know they've got a player, Gabriel Sarr, he's a threat from set pieces. I think he's 3rd or 4th in the assists chart this season with 9, and 5 of those have come from set pieces as well. So that's an area that Sunderland will have to be at it at as well. So yeah, it's a tough game. I think a lot of people would say that a point normally in normal circumstances will be a good result, but given where Sunderland are at, they're at the point where they need to convert wins, and if they were to win, what a way it would be to set them up going into this week, because then you could go into this Leicester game on Tuesday back at the Stadium of Light and really give a go yourselves. And they've shown that, and Dodds was keen to stress that yesterday as well. In the 3 reverse fixtures against these teams, they've made really good accounts of themselves. Really good against Norwich with a win, unlucky down at Leicester, Southampton obviously 5-0, probably the performance of the season. So they've proven that they can do it. Can they go and do it again? It's a big ask.
Yeah, it certainly feels like there's been a momentum swing, hasn't there, or a change in I don't know if it's confidence or just there's certainly a change in mood around the place compared to those previous games. But that's what they need. They need to start to gather. I don't want to completely write off the playoff hopes yet, because it is the Championship and anything can happen. But it is at the moment. It looks extremely, extremely difficult. I mean, if you lose this weekend, you could risk being 11 points adrift, and that is a monumental sort of huge mountain to climb, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, you'd be 11 points with 11 games then, wouldn't you? You'd have to, as it says, you'd have to outpoint people, every week. And that is really, really tough. Sunderland, as I said there, the similarities from last season, they only got in on the last day of the season. And that was a 6-point deficit at this stage. It's 8 this time. Probably going to need a higher total than the 69 that they got last year.
Yeah. It's
going to be tough. It's going to be really, really tough. Like you say, you can't write it off until it's off. And that's certainly an attitude that Mike Dodds has had and will continue to have, because he's certainly not going to come out and say, that's us done. But yeah, it feels very I mean, this week will certainly shape things. If Sunderland don't get the results that they would probably need, I mean, what would you think this week out of the 3 games? Would they need 2 wins probably if you're serious about getting back into the contention?
I'd say so. I mean, I'm not a betting man, but I think one thing you can't say about Sunderland is that when they've played the better sides, they have risen their game. They've been much better against the sides where maybe they press them and there's more pockets of space where they can find. I mean, even if you look back at the Borough game in particular, all right, by no means a classic, but that was 2 teams going at it, and I actually thought Sunderland had the better chances. In that bar again, consistency, a period of half an hour maybe, where Borough really sort of put their foot down on the gas. That's been, we know that this Sunderland side has it in them to beat the teams that are up there and beat the best in the division. We just haven't seen that on a consistent basis. So I'd probably agree. I think you need 2 from 3 if you really want to keep your whatever feigned playoff hopes alive. You need 2 wins. If you get 3, wow, all of a sudden you're right. You should be or could be right back in that mix. But realistically, do I think they'll get that? Probably not. I'm not going to predict what I think they'll get, because at the minute there's just too much. There's just too much going on to suggest that. But I think you're right in saying 2 is what they need to at least get back into that firm contention for the playoffs coming in the season. What do you think?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, in normal circumstances, you'd say 4 points would be a good return from these games. To be unbeaten in 2 of them, but just the need to close that gap. I think 2 wins would be the minimum, and that is a big ask against these teams. Strange things happen. I think we touched on it on Monday, didn't we? It strikes me as being typical Sunderland if they were to go and get a result, certainly get 1 win out of these 3 games. there'll be a lot of people who are looking at them thinking that this is a daunting run of fixtures. Dodds hit the nail on the head as well yesterday. These are challenges that they've got to face head on. I think to paraphrase, he sort of said, we want to get back to the Premier League. We know it's going to be tough, but if we don't want to face up and front up to these sort of challenges, then we don't deserve to be in the Premier League. Yeah. So let's go and have a go at it. And that is, it's absolutely the right mindset to have. You can't go into these games fearing these teams because they will punish you. Norwich are in decent form, like you said, particularly at home, scoring a lot of goals at home. Leicester, as we know, and then Southampton going down there. That's a tough place to go as well. Just go into them. Like I think I said on Monday, almost a free hit. That it's a little bit naive to say that because you can't say that, but just go in with no fear with them. That has to be the message I think that Dodds is trying to put across. And then, like you said, if you can get a result tomorrow, it can kickstart what could be a really, really good week. And if you did come out of this with a good week, just imagine the momentum and that could swing them back in the favour of the team and Dodds. It's a young team that thrive on confidence and things like that. If they won't get a result against teams that, certainly two teams in Leicester and Southampton, who could very well be in the Premier League next season, that's a major confidence boost, considering that's where Sunderland want to be themselves.
Yeah, of course. That's brilliant. Thanks very much, Joe. Again, we are Sunderland. We're over on we're over on other podcast platforms as well. If you're listening over there, we're on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe. It's a place to be for everything red and white, tactical analysis, exclusive interviews and insight from former players. Just £1 for 6 months worth of subscription, and we've been in partnership with the Farm Museum and Cost Specs Opticians. Thanks for joining us. Catch you later.